Hello, everybody, and welcome to Where is the Line, where we explore the gray areas of life. My name is Jane, and I am with my co-host, Sabrina. Sabrina, how are you doing?
Hey Jane, I'm doing really well. I am going through some logistical challenges. I may not have shared this on the podcast yet, but I will be moving to San Francisco for my job, and it is exciting, but it's bittersweet. So I'm dealing with saying goodbye to Minneapolis in a month, and also trying to embrace this new adventure.
Mhm.
So yeah, trying to be optimistic, but there's a lot that has to happen in the background. But yeah, hopefully maybe you can come visit me there.
Yeah,
Um,
I feel like, I mean, listen, it is what it is. You do have to go through the administrative work of moving, and it sucks, but I do feel like it's very exciting. It's like a new chapter in your life. And
mm,
there's a chance that by the time we post this, you're already in San Francisco. So I'm sure you've already like laid down your
that is
new
true.
roots in a new city. So I'm very
Hmm.
excited for you.
Yeah, what's new with you?
I am starting to look forward to a trip later this fall. So we're doing a little bit of planning on our end as well. We're thinking of doing a couple days in Taipei, then flying to Beijing, then going out to Hong Kong. So it's going to be like a maybe a 2-ish week trip. And I have a lot of
Wow.
family out there. So I'm very excited. It's been a very long time since I've been back there.
Amazing. That those all those locations are on my bucket list. So
All right. Well, I'm very excited about today's episode. This is a topic that you and I have talked about previously. I'm a very risk-averse person, so I flirt with this idea, but I'm a little too scared. So today's guest is going to share a lot more context about his experience. But Sabrina, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest today?
yes, it's such a pleasure for me to introduce Ed Brill. About a topic. Ed is going to talk about a topic that, yeah, like you said, it has piqued all of our interests. I think arguably the world and in America, it's just gaining the interest of more and more people. And that is corporate versus freelance. So in the
Mhm.
American world, it would be like a W-2 versus a 1099, right? And I am so happy that we have someone on who can talk to both of these worlds. Ed and I actually had the pleasure of meeting back in 2011, 2012, when he was a guest speaker at one of my business school classes at Cal State in Chicago. And he's someone that always inspired me ever since that time he was in the classroom and just gave us some like real-time application to all this theory that we were learning. And so we're coming here full circle here 12 years later. But yeah, so I'll give a little bit of intro, and I would love to hand it over to Ed. But just from his looking at his journey, it's really impressive. He's had quite the trajectory. He started out at IBM as a sales engineer, actually, and then he worked his way up to the VP of product management. He's also led multiple, well, he had a portfolio of healthcare analytics solutions. He was also most recently the CPTO within insurance and marketing services. And then he started to become self-employed. So Ed, would love for you to tell us a little bit more about yourself, your career journey from your time at IBM to becoming the CPO, the CTO, to all of these different in all of these different corporations to now becoming independent.
Yeah, thank you, Sabrina and Jane. And yeah, the guest lecture phase of my career was a really good one. It was part of the, sort of IBM phase of the journey, and it was a really good opportunity to get embedded in the Chicago, community. And I still am in touch with a bunch of people from classes that I spoke at 10 or 15 years ago. So I studied marketing and entrepreneurship for a hot minute when I was graduating college. I actually thought I was going to go into retail. And then I spent a summer working for the university in their computing services organization and learned about the internet. And the internet was just emerging at the time. But it was enough to sort of say, maybe this is a thing. And so actually I had a couple of hands-on technical jobs. And the second of those, I started working with some software, and the vendor came on site one day and was like, we actually could use somebody like you on the vendor side of the equation. We need people who believe in this stuff and can sell it. And so I joined Lotus in 1994 at a time when most people knew Lotus for 123, which is a spreadsheet that competed with Excel. I'm sorry, I have to give the history lesson, but IBM acquired Lotus in 1995, and then I ended up staying. And over the course of my time there, I held 14 different jobs. I was there for 24 years total. Managed a $700 million annual business, visited clients all over the world, built great teams, many of whom are still friends or in my network, and became a pioneer in social media in the context of business. But IBM eventually decided to stop investing in the product that I worked on. And so I decided to pivot again and went into some of these smaller organizations where I was able to be part of the executive team and help lead organizations and build some really great products. And again, some really great teams and some great people. But I found that in each of those smaller settings that once I sort of worked on the initial set of challenges and solved them, that then it felt like the sands shifted or there was some different set of expectations that just didn't work for me, maybe didn't work for my employers. It doesn't really matter. But I found, sort of that I was in a more of a churn kind of a situation than I expected to be when I, took my next act. And so last year I had dinner with some friends, and one of them pushed a button that at the time, maybe seemed really obvious, and said, maybe if that's the thing you do is you come in and you solve problems, maybe that's what you should do on your own, and go out and do that for a lot of different organizations. So that's where I am.
Wow, incredible. So it sounds like it may have been like a build-up, but then it was this dinner that you had where some of the friends maybe give you that additional push that made you very cool. Well, you're clearly not alone. Just to plug a quick stat here too, the number of freelancers in the US has been steadily increasing. So we recently had about 74 million freelancers in the US in 2023, and they're projected to make up more than 50% of the US workforce by 2027, which is quite substantial if we think about it, right? So it's definitely a growing economy. Now that you've been, I know it's been a year, right? But like, what were some of the key differences that you were noticing after transitioning from like a steady W-2 employee to now becoming a freelancer, and any sort of misconceptions that you might have had that you'd like people to know about?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest transition is you rely entirely on yourself for motivation. There's no team of people, there's no calendar, there's no corporate something that gets you up in the morning. It's all on you to make it happen. And that means you're not just doing whatever it is you want to do, but you're also your own salesperson. Whether you want to be or not, right? Like you have to be, a self-promoter, and you have to hustle to find the work. But that has upside to it as well. I've found that the networking comes pretty easy, even for somebody like me who presents as an extrovert, but I am not. I am deep down a real introvert, and talking to people I've never talked to before is challenging, but I've found tools that help with that. And almost everybody I've been introduced to will take a call and brainstorm. Are there dead ends and ghosting? Yeah, sure, of course. But I've experienced genuine kindness and giving kind of over and over. So misconceptions, I think, misconception is that it's like, a completely different world. It's not. You're still doing work. But it is absolutely a world where the biggest difference is who's driving the train, and it's 100% yourself.
That's so interesting. And I think it goes back to that self-motivation that you kind of started this conversation with, because everything is reliant upon you. And even that requirement is not for everyone, right? Like some people may not have that motivation to do all the work that comes with going through this. Before we break it down, I also just have to make a connection here. This is a really funny connection, but I used to work at IBM myself. I started my career after college at IBM, and back then we used Lotus Notes. So you mentioned Lotus, and I was like, oh, his work impacted my like first corporate experience when I started at IBM. Anyways,
Me.
I I would love to deep dive a little bit because you touched on some of the key themes, but let's go a little bit deeper.
Yep.
Let's maybe start with some of the biggest advantages or like the pros of becoming a freelancer. Like tell us a little bit more about what maybe for you works better as a freelancer versus a more traditional corporate job.
Yeah, I think the the biggest advantage as a freelancer, for me at least, has been the spectrum of opportunity that's sitting before you. As I started to talk to people, I was surprisingly introduced to a bunch of new business models, new networks, new tools. Every day was a learning opportunity. And there was a day, I don't know, about 4 weeks after I publicly announced that I was doing this, that a light bulb went off. And that light bulb was about giving myself permission. And I'll probably talk about permission a lot today, but it was permission to explore any idea that came at me. I had preconceived thoughts about how I was going to do this, but all of a sudden, these things were coming at me that I had never really had any visibility to because I had been a W-2 employee working for a company for, 30 plus years. So all of a sudden, I had seeds that were being planted, and I had to give myself permission to say, maybe that's worth looking at. And I didn't want, this was super important to me. I didn't want to look back at this moment 5 or 10 years down the road and go, gosh, I wish I had given myself a chance to think about whether maybe this other thing would, have been a better part of my portfolio right now. And I had to really, sort of constrain that. So as much as I gave myself permission, at some point I said, how many different threads of activity can my ADHD brain handle at any given time? Who did I want to work with, or could I fly solo from down here in the basement? Did I want all my work to even be in technology? I'd been in technology for my entire career, but was it time to consider turning some of my side hustles into mainstream income? Was it too late to be a TikTok influencer? Right? Like I really went through it all, and I still am going through it all, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, some more. So, you could put sort of three catchphrases from, the quotes of the world together here. The world's your oyster, fine. So think about, anything and everything you ever wanted to consider. You write that on a column of, here's your ideas. And that's very freeing, very permissive compared to being in a traditional corporate role. And then I added to that, everything happens for a reason and carpe diem. And I put all that together and said, all right, no, I have my second book done. No, but I haven't written that yet either. But maybe that's another thing that I should do, right? So the biggest advantages are clearly this, spectrum of opportunity that you can go pursue that, in a corporate world, yes, you can change jobs within a company. Yes, you can change, careers in a corporate world. And you had a guest a couple of episodes earlier who talked about changing from athlete to, going corporate. And I mean, I thought her message was really important, right? You can always change again. And maybe somebody will bring me a W-2 job again that I would love to do. I have no idea, right? But at least I'm giving myself this opportunity now to go pursue some things I've never done before. And it's really given me some great opportunities I would not have seen.
That's so interesting because it sounds like you've gotten that permission from yourself, but then also you are now experiencing this freedom that many of us don't necessarily have, right? Like you now can go explore anything and everything. Like to your point, the world is your oyster. You can quite literally go pursue anything if you're passionate about it and see if it works. And help us understand, what about like the negatives that you're experiencing, and even to the point about permission and the freedom to now go explore everything? Like obviously you have to still deliver work and sell yourself, right? You mentioned how do you like balance that? Let's maybe start with the cons first.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge has been, the ability to drive outcomes, right? Like I no longer am the person making the decision and making things therefore happen, right? I am a outsider looking in a lot of these cases, even if I'm on contract, right? Like it's going to be a little different. And I can make all the great recommendations and have all the great ideas and, say here's what should happen. But at the end of the day, nobody's accountable to me, right? I'm accountable to me. So I can't expect, clients to be reply, people, right? Like I'm so used to, being on Slack or email with, a group of people that I'm working with and getting instant responses and commitments and scheduling the meetings and making things move forward. And now I'm just one of many priorities that, somebody that I'm working with has, and probably not their top priority anymore. So that is really one that I'm still admittedly getting used to. I'm used to just saying yes, at least when things are possible, and I don't have as much of an ability to catalyze that, as I was as a corporate leader. You can be persuasive and data driven and show potential clients what success looks like, but I'm not their boss. I'm not in the same organization. I'm not in the same culture. And we're not working in the same, political or policy environment. So,
Mm.
one of the real cons is you have to be prepared not just to sell yourself, but to keep selling yourself to the value of why somebody would want you to renew a contract or give you a positive reference for the next one, or even in the case of side hustles, maybe they're sites that post freelancers like Upwork, and you need a 5-star review, right, to get the next client. Those are all things I can't command, I can't expect, and that change in mindset to being more of a need, a take than a give, is a huge adjustment for me. I think sometimes you're also in a position where you're having to, sort of quote unquote give it away, right? You have to show people what your value is before they're willing to pay you for it.
Yeah.
And that's a very different thing than being hired and having a job and they're paying you for your expertise, right? So it's a very different process.
Yeah, I think, and it also probably requires an incredible amount of discipline, right? Like you talked about, sure, maybe that first time of exploration is more like discovery and where are my interests and all that. But then, okay, how do I really put my pen to paper now and really go after where my interests lie, but also my skill set, right? And where do I find that sweet spot? And really what you were saying is, it just reminded me also when I was just unemployed, not for my own will, right? But I spent 5 months just actually exploring, and it was so beautiful to, take UX research courses or do work on my editing skills for the podcast. And to your point, like what you said really resonated with me. It was like a forced time off, but it was so incredibly powerful and meaningful for me, because I would have otherwise just been heads down in my corporate job and never even looked up.
Sometimes I think Sabrina, your point, we're often so caught up in the job that we are in that more corporate, like kind of stable, every day is the same kind of experience, that we don't look back or step out of that environment to think about, I actually have this other passion, or I have this other interest, or this other skill set that I can flex and make that into my career. A lot of times we're only thinking like vertically, okay, I need to get promoted. I need to get doing the same thing. But I think, Ed, to your point, this actually created an opportunity for you to explore and develop a lot of other skills that maybe you wouldn't be able to if you're just so focused on a more traditional corporate role. But yeah, that's just my reflection as you guys were talking.
Yeah, no, I got really excited about that, and that is the beauty, and that are some of the pros, right? What then, on the other hand, those would scare me, Ed, and would love your perspective here, financially, right? Like, of course, there has to be you have to be in a certain place to be able to afford just, going off of that stable salary and just taking that time, right, to figure out what's next. So can you dive a little bit deeper for our audience around the financial implications? What are some are there any tax benefits that comes with going on 1099? I'm pretty naive to this. So whatever you could share there around just financially, that would be really helpful.
This is a where is the line question, right? Like this is perfect for your podcast, because as I've listened to the other episodes, this is one of those things you have to really answer for yourself before you make a decision, right? And again, for 3+ decades, I have had steady, income, predictable, all of that. And it's led to very good things. And all of a sudden, I'm at a place where I can't verify income, right? And does it matter? I have a mortgage and whatever. No, but my oldest daughter just graduated college and wanted to move. And am I going to be able to co-sign in an apartment when I have no provable income right now, right? Like, I don't know. So there are a lot of things that it's not even just about thinking about yourself, but about your entire situation, right? So this is, I think this is probably one of those things that, sort of prompts the topic overall. And building a business, right, which you're doing if you go freelance means no income for a while. Even if you land a contract tomorrow, you're not likely to get paid up front, right? And, so the flow is different. It's not constant. It's jumps, fits and starts. And you have to level that out for yourself. You have to budget accordingly. You have to understand where things are going to come from. There's a lot of startup costs, computers, software subscriptions, LLC incorporation, and for many people, consideration for big things like how to obtain healthcare. So I spent a few months just trying to figure all of this out. And I had some, really good mentors who had already done, made this jump and could tell me kind of things to think about. But I didn't make a dollar for almost 5 months. From the day that I left my last job to the first contract that I got paid on. And, so okay, a freelancer typically gets to bill at rates that compensate for that, but the cash flow is completely non-linear. And you're basically, have to invest up front to pay yourself against your future potential. So if you aren't in a position to do any of that, then, freelancing is probably not going to work, right? And that's okay, right? That's why there are multiple models. But but I happen to be at a point where, my wife was able to get the family health care through her employer, which we had never done before, but that made a huge, that's like for a family, that's a $25,000-$30,000 a year decision, right? And, it's great that we have, exchanges and publicly available contracts, but it's not like Europe where it's just, part of what the government provides, right? And so freelancing's been a much more popular option if you look at the European tech market, for example, because they don't have to think about who's providing their healthcare, right? So it's a very different equation. From a tax perspective, you mentioned that you could set up an LLC in various structures, including some where your net income is likely to be kind of higher per dollar than in a W-2 situation because you're able to deduct more things. Like if you bought a home computer while you're working for a company, you're not really going to likely be able to pass that home computer as a business expense. But when it's in an LLC, like all of that is, right? So so there's lots of ways to offset the income. There are things that you might need to do anyway. But your actual costs for things are sometimes also likely higher than you're used to or expecting. I'm paying for Adobe and Microsoft Office, and I'm using this lovely tool called Blocks that's like a meeting briefer and recorder. And, like you could end up spending hundreds of dollars a month on little software add-ins that run your business. And, that's great. But at some point, those are expenses you're not used to, right? So I've had to offset all of that, right? I've had to really think about, well, what is it, that's going to make this worthwhile? And some of it is non-financial, right? Like I actually, just before I joined the recording, I read an article about somebody who quit their corporate, tech, blah, blah, blah job and went to pastry school in France and is making $30,000 a year. And they're happy, right? And so everybody gets to make their own decisions, right? And so in some cases, somebody who might go freelance say, okay, this might be better for me in other ways, but there's a lot to think about from a dollars perspective for sure.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you laying out. It sounds like you were really thoughtful and intentional about it, right? Which is very important. So for our listeners, I'm a big fan of spreadsheets and budgeting. So if you have like you have like a certain income that's going away, right? Just mapping out sort of your runway, and can you be okay with having no income for 5 months, right? But what does that mean? What are your expenses? And getting really granular, just so you can project out. I think that's super important.
Even from my observation, like preparing for this, I was thinking, okay, who around me is most of my friends admittedly are in more of a traditional corporate W-2 types of roles. But I am starting to notice there's a lot of like contractors, for example, at the company that I work at. And when I talk to them about like, how do you feel about this versus like, would you want a full-time role at the company? And I think from their perspective, they take for granted, or we take for granted the access to the tools and systems that your company already pays for the subscription. Like you mentioned, right? Like you're paying a lot of these random monthly fees to be able to operate your business. But then as a contractor, you may not have that like privilege to access a lot of the tools and systems. But on the other hand, like I think they are paying, or they might be paid slightly better, but then no health insurance. So a lot of them tend to be a little younger, and they worry a little less about having a family to worry about, or it's just themselves. And so there's just, yeah, a lot of what you're sharing is really resonating with what I've been observing as well. And all the considerations that like some of my friends who are in more contracting roles have considered. Um, can you help us understand work-life balance? Because I think for like all of us, this is such a hot topic and it is so important. Do you feel like now shifting into more of a freelancing role, are you finding yourself working more, working maybe at the mercy of like your clients' working hours? Or do you feel like you have more control over your personal time and you choose when you want to work? Um, yeah, help shed some light there.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on the kinds of freelance work that I ultimately end up, majoring in, right? There's some of it that I can be in a lot of control, and some of it that I'm definitely responsive to others, right? So we'll see, and we can, sort of play that out in our heads a little bit. In my last corporate job, I was commuting, by car 30 miles each way every day. And I was expected to be in the office, right? So my health definitely suffered for that. Um, but as an independent, I can work, I can do things when my brain is, ready and engaged and productive. And sometimes that's after dinner until 10 or 11 at night. And, you know, I I'm really good at working that way. I did that a lot when I worked at IBM, and I, was in a global job and had to do calls with Asia, that were late at night. But it does mean today that I can get a bike ride in for a few hours during the day, and I don't have any guilt anymore about it. There's no
Mhm.
there's no people back at the office waiting on me for something. Am I obviously reachable if I'm out doing that? Of course. But there's not this perception that I'm on the clock, because I'm not. I'm only on my own clock. And what I'm committing to in some, contract environment is really around deliverables and outcomes more than around time. There are some things that I've thought about doing that are more time-based, and maybe that would change my perception on this topic. But right now I'm thinking, it's about boundaries and routine, right? So if I say, all right, I'm going to do this, set of activities every day, and I just need to parse that out on my calendar, then that's all right. In the first few weeks of this, though, admittedly, I was totally overwhelmed and I felt like I wasn't getting anything done. And actually, my therapist and I worked through a daily checklist, and we said, all right, let's try to, have exercise done and be at your desk by 10 a.m. Spend that first hour catching up on notifications and emails and alerts and actions, and then block the rest of the day into chunks on the calendar. Now, that doesn't always work. There might be travel, there might be a client call in the middle of that, but at least putting some structure in place, super important. Again, admitting my ADHD, right? But like I had to have something, because otherwise I was just sitting here going, oh, what's on Facebook right now? What's going on? Right. And I've actually put time limits on a bunch of the apps on my phone.
Mm.
Because I was finding it, way too easy to say, okay, well, it's 20 minutes to that next call. Why don't I play a few rounds of Words with Friends, right? Or something like that. That probably, I'll admit one thing in this work-life balance. Both I and one of my children have had some kind of health and environmental challenges in the last few months. I'm honestly not sure how I would have managed all of that if I had been on the clock 8 to 5, in the commute to the
Mm.
office that I was doing last year. It's taken a lot of time to chase down appointments and travel back and forth to my daughter who's out in New York and see specialists and whatever. And, I kind of feel like this is thankfully where I'm at right now. I would have been having to juggle a lot in a traditional work environment. Am I available to the clients and the people that I'm working with? Absolutely. Am I working, today on building some, PowerPoint slides I'm going to review at a dinner tomorrow night? 100%, right? But having those opportunities to take care of, job one around family,
Yeah.
I don't know how I would have done it otherwise.
First of all, I hope your daughter is okay and doing better. But yeah, that is, I think I can see it as a pro, you having more of that flexibility. But then I also, when you were speaking, I thought, like, for myself, I would struggle so much with the sort of holding myself accountable to certain timelines. Like, and I love how you talked about your therapist and how, yeah, like by 10, you should have this. I think I would need that in order for me to be an independent freelancer, to have still like a somewhat of a plan for the day. And also set boundaries of like, when am I not gonna go on my computer anymore? Like things like that. But yeah, so in terms of, you touched on this earlier, but pivoting a little bit to networking, you said, and again, this is really inspirational. But for myself, I'll relate it to when I was looking for jobs. It was sometimes a little bit daunting for me to reach out to people, because I was like, oh, I'm bothering them. And I'm like, ooh, they are like, what does she want? Does she want a job? And so, can you talk a little bit more about how you maintain and how you grew and just uphold that network, to when you were full-time employed to now you're freelancer, and sort of getting rid of this fear of, oh, what are they gonna say if I reach out to them, and this whole like not being a burden. I think a lot of people think that, and therefore they might not feel as inclined to reach out to others.
Yeah, and it goes back to two things. It goes back to just networking in general, but also doing your own sales pitch, right? Your own business development, right? And I definitely feel inhibited about just popping into somebody's inbox out of the blue, because they're gonna smell it a mile away. Oh, he's looking for whether we got something we can, hire him to do or whatever, right? So what I actually have found though is that I'm doing a lot of networking with people I've never met before, introduced by people I do know, right? So are people I would never have otherwise crossed paths with. And those people seem to be generally willing to take a call, because you have somebody vouching for you, right? So neighbors, people I've worked with before, friends have just introduced him. He's been doing some independent work. Maybe you should talk to him. And as a result, I've signed into two of these independent networks. I don't know what the right term is. They're collectives or federations or groups of people that have chosen to work sort of like a company, on more of an opt-in basis. And so, these groups have different skills. It's kind of like putting together a sports team, people with different positions, somebody who's got a sales background, somebody who's got a marketing background, somebody who's a technical person, somebody who's a finance person, trying to put together groups of people that then can go sell together. So you're not having to be just, hi, I'm Ed, and I'm a product guy, right? I'm finding for me that model doesn't work so well. I've done some projects where it's just me, and I have great reviews from them, and I really helped, with one of them setting a business up for their eventual, long-term vision. But working with people is really important. And even in that case, the head of product in that organization is a friend of mine, right? And so I think that the chemistry really worked, for him to bring in an outsider and us to play off each other. So I think networking is actually a tremendous opportunity when you go freelance. But it is something that even as a, full-time employee, you should always be investing time in. I think that, the only way I've gotten to this point now is because I wasn't, absent from people's radar for 10 years and then just suddenly popped back up. There's lots of people in my network, right? Like certainly I'm never going to reach all 4,000 people that are in my LinkedIn or whatever. But even if I could reach 400 or 500 on a once every 6 month basis, there's a lot that will come from that. I think that there's also, opportunities as a freelancer that are good for visibility, like doing podcasts or speaking opportunities or things where, if you're in a corporate environment, you might have to get permission to do, that in an independent environment, you just go do, right? So I think that there's some ways to keep the network engaged and share your expertise. And so that's been really good.
And I like how, because again, it's like it's all about the consistency, right? And I try to remind myself of that, even if I am in a full-time job, to your point. Consistently network, reach out to your people, engage and nurture that network, right? Because you never know what will happen. And one day, and we all, at the end of the day, I think people have really good intentions, right? And people genuinely, I think, want to help. Some people may be busy, but what's the worst that can happen if you reach out? They won't respond, they will ghost. Okay, but then I think there's a bigger cost of not reaching out than actually reaching out. So in terms of doubling or circling back to an area, this notion of permission, you mentioned it earlier, and giving yourself grace and space to explore. But what are some of the biggest changes that you found as you're making decisions now that you're a freelancer, also recognizing you have a family, so it's not just for your own that you made that decision. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, I spent the first 90 days of this journey building a list of opportunities kind of in two columns, right? Ways that I could see being successful, doing what I want to be doing, learning, giving back, mentoring, and yes, making money, right? And I triaged and prioritized them based on the ones that seemed to fit my, personal criteria the most. But this is a where's the line question as well, right? Like there are at least three things on my not now list that I actually would probably be more personally pretty excited about. But they're either too big of a lift to be positioned as a way to success, like a lot of retraining needed, or learning or investment in just skills that I haven't had yet, or there are things that may not pay sufficiently to really be worth pursuing them. I registered a screen name across Insta and TikTok and YouTube that I know I could turn into something really fun, but is for 1,000 views worth that energy? I don't know yet. I know exactly what I want to do with it, but I haven't crossed that line yet. I'm an Airbnb host. We got into it 2 years ago, my wife and I, and we're very successful. We have 51 perfect 5-star ratings on the place that we own. But
Wow.
after that, 2 years in, I'm like, especially after I've stayed in a couple of Airbnbs in the last few months that have not been perfect. And I'm thinking, maybe I should go co-host or be another, consultant in the Airbnb space. I'd be way better than a lot of people at it. But again, is that sufficient income versus, 30 years of tech experience that I can give back in ways that I can, monetize differently? I'm doing social media for a nonprofit, for a community foundation here in Highland Park where I live. And, I'm billing that at what they can afford rather than what the market would pay. But I look at that as the kind of decision that is good for me personally, right? Like it's part of my giving back, and it keeps me connected to really good people and good organizations and involved in my community. But, all of these are triage, right? So, are they decisions affecting not just me and but also my family? 100%. Have I worked out the budget, Sabrina? Do I have a spreadsheet of here's how I'm going to get to making what I need? Nope, I'm not there yet. But I'm trying to play through enough of the opportunities that are in front of me that I know financially will pay well enough that they might not be 40-hour a week kind of commitments. They're 25 to 30 combined. And then I'd have 10 to 20 hours a week that I could continue to, pursue these side hustles into something if they make sense. But I haven't fully exhausted that list. And there will be something else that pops onto it in 2 months. And I think that's part of the fun of being in this place.
First of all, I always joke with people, I'm like, I want to be a real estate mogul in Chicago. And I'm always flirting with the idea of being an Airbnb host, because sometimes I do go to some of these Airbnbs. I'm like, you could do better there, So I'm very judgy when I go to the Airbnbs. But yeah, I think honestly what resonates so much with me through this conversation, it just goes back to the freedom and the permission, right? Like hearing your experience and like breaking down the different streams of income that you have now as a freelancer just further validates to me that you're now able to you have the permission and the freedom to go explore your passions, have some projects that are more with nonprofits, right? Like you care about the vision and the mission and you're doing it more for that rather than purely the income. There are some things you're doing purely for income, and that's totally fair too. And then you have other things that like you're like, hey, this is good income, like the Airbnb, maybe this could be more, but I need to weigh my pros and cons, right? I'm kind of jealous because there's a level of freedom to have all these different side hustles and they come together. But then also part of me is like, am I self-motivated enough to like keep track of all these things, to want to do well across all these different things? So help us understand like what types of people should get into this if somebody wants to transition from more of a stable W-2 corporate role, right? Where you have that income, you have ebbs and flows in how busy things are, but like it's guaranteed. I guess I can't even say it's guaranteed. Nowadays, nothing's guaranteed.
That is true.
Versus the freelancing world where you have permission and freedom to go explore, but it's very much about self-motivation, could be a little bit of luck, could very much be about your network. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, nobody's going to get you up in the morning, set your schedule, invite you to meetings, get goals and objectives, identify who you should network with. None of that's going to happen for you. You have to fully be ready to be your own boss. And that's very exciting. It's been, a pretty cool year for me, but it's also scary, every day, right? At times, right? I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, what's going to happen tomorrow, right? And I'm used to having, I worked for one company for 24 years. I didn't think very often about stability. That was not a word that was in my vocabulary. Now that company, laid people off all the time, right? But I knew that I was in a pretty secure position no matter what I was doing there, and I didn't have that anxiety. In my smaller jobs, though, it turned out I had that anxiety, right? Some of them didn't work out, not for reasons on my side, right? And I didn't expect that. So to your point, Jane, right? Like there is nothing guaranteed. So, if I'm going to do this on my own, I think my advice is the place to start is kind of what you're excited about. Figure out what your side hustle is that you could be successful at, drive your own initiatives, learn what motivates you, and figure out whether that's a work style you could pivot to. Um, let's be clear, being a W-2 employee is great, right? Like I did it for 3 decades and I had great experiences, learned a lot. I, never went to get an MBA because I felt like I learned on the job, right? And, I was able to be in the C-suite in several companies as a result. I think generationally, people don't spend 24 years at one company like I did, right? Like, it's just not a thing anymore. So that kind of stability isn't the same. But there are plenty of ways to keep your skills growing and your experiences engaged and get a ton of satisfaction, even out of 100% just working corporate. But you can try some things, put a toe in the water, start your TikTok account. Can be all sorts of things, right? Upwork and those models are really interesting, right? Like you can get on a site like that and just hang a shingle, right? And it costs very, very little. And that could be very much the way of the world. I think one thing that I would also say in terms of skills that we keep collectively coming back to is having great mentors really helps. You can trust your gut. I've always been a trust your gut guy. I work in a field in product management as most of my work where people want to be very much data driven. And I believe that it's a gut-based profession. I think that good product managers are born, not made. I think it's people who, really have the right instincts for the kind of decisions to make, can back it with data all you want. But you got to have others reflect your thinking back to you. And that's always how I've made decisions is I listen to, a lot of different inputs and then try to reflect them back in a way that is meaningful to me. So even if I end up pursuing some of these projects, I'm doing it because I'm hearing the business problem explained to me in ways that maybe the company themselves hasn't come to or the market hasn't come to. And, that skill is really super important. I did a project already with a tech company trying to decide their long-term roadmap. And boy, I really wanted to solve the puzzle, but they wanted to solve the puzzle. They wanted to get in the room and have a workshop and come up with it. So I had to decide where's the line? Where was I going to cross the line into, I'm going to play product manager for you a few minutes. And where am I going to just stay? No, I'm the facilitator trying to lead you to getting to the right answer. So having that reflective skill, I think is probably the best one in freelancing. And, you can learn that from mentors, you can learn it on the job, but having the way to teach people to think, and come to the conclusion, come to the outcome themselves is a pretty valuable set of skills to have.
Yeah. You mentioned Upwork too. I was just thinking about the statistics that Sabrina shared with us even in the very beginning, that more and more people are moving into this freelance world. And as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking like it's got to be a culmination of a lot of these different things. Part of it is the lack of stability, right? There's a lot more companies going through layoffs and cuts and stuff that drives a lot more people to consider freelancing or consider how long they want to be with a particular company and how stable it actually is. But then at the same time, you have these platforms like Upworks, or even for a lot of creatives, like Etsy is a great place for people to sell their work. And so there's all these emerging platforms that makes it much easier for people to go through that rather than needing to go through the entire things of starting your own company and going through all the very complex steps. So I think it's got to be a combination of a lot of these that makes it more possible for a lot more people to explore freelancing. And as we think about more and more folks going into more of this freelance world, what would you recommend to people based on your experience, what would you have done differently now looking back to your transition?
And it's funny what you just covered, like going back to Sabrina's stats, there's such a moment happening here. I think about, again, my older daughter just graduated college last month, and she and her cohort, like very few job opportunities. They're not even getting interviews, right? So the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post have both written stories in the last few weeks about college grads are not getting hired into traditional jobs right now. It's a really weird time because unemployment is like theoretically at 4%. And there are certainly professions in America today where you can have your pick of jobs. But in the kinds of things that people want to do as professions, that's less the case right now. And so having the flexibility and adaptability to look at what are your options? Etsy is another good one. Fiverr is another good one. There's a whole bunch of marketplaces for marketeers and PR people. And, AI is going to impact a lot of this too, right? In both positive and negative ways, right? So there's like so many different dimensions. And I think I would have, to finally answer your actual question, I would have probably explored a little bit more before I jumped in. I spent, 3 months dark, right? I quit my job. I ended in early October last year. And I spent the last 3 months of the year just talking to people. I didn't announce, I didn't, change my LinkedIn, and I didn't anything. But sometimes in life, you can't really see the journey ahead until you get to a different vantage point. And I feel like this is one of those where I needed probably to go further down the path and see what I was going to see. I also have had to recalculate a bit. I thought that one of the things that I saw modeled, I've actually hired people doing the kind of work that I was trying to do, who were very public, written books, publishing articles, doing a Substack. And so I thought I'd be doing that too. And I started up the first week, I wrote 2 updates, and then I write another update after that, because it felt very inauthentic to me. And honestly, like one of the things from way back in doing B2B social media is that authentic voice is super, super important. And I didn't want to not be that. I wanted to be, still Ed Brill, because if I was going to work my network, I needed to be the person that they all had worked with at some point or knew at some point, right? So finding a niche is important. Telling everyone it's your niche runs the risk of sounding like everyone else. So I think the thing I would have done differently is really understand what were some of my base paths. I wouldn't necessarily have tried to triage it all out, because new opportunities are going to continue to come at me every day. But at least understanding what did my book of business look like, or what did I think it would look like from day one, as opposed to hanging the shingle and then seeing what happened. Now that may have led to some really interesting kismet moments, but I didn't think I was as prepared as I would have been.
I know, yeah. And it just goes to show again, like there is no right or wrong, right? It's about exploring, it's about pivoting. And I still go back to what you said earlier, the whole nothing is, and what also Katie said in the other podcast, like nothing is permanent, right? And you can always pivot again in the realm of feasibility, of course. So we're coming up on the end of our podcast slowly here, Ed. And as you know, we love to talk about identity on where's the line. And just that was also big as I sort of prepared mentally for this episode and this conversation. Jane and I talked about this. I really pride myself at working at a well-renowned company. Like I was very proud to work at some of these big names in tech. And yeah, I'm proud to say that. And so if I imagine leaving, I mean, I was nowhere where you were seniority wise, but leaving that VP title, leaving other companies like with big names, whether it's IBM or the other ones that maybe a little bit smaller, but like how did you navigate that? Like, what was that like? And how did you, I'm imagining there's got to be some redefining of success happening. Like, what is success for you? Or how do you find your new identity, I guess?
Yeah, I sit down here in my office surrounded by artifacts of a 30-year legacy, collectibles from around the world. And I was, quoted in the Wall Street Journal and Forbes magazine cover articles. And, all of that time as a leader at IBM was really incredible. And, the company started to decline, and we made the decision to divest my product, right? It's still around. It's not owned by IBM anymore, but I didn't want to go with it at that point. So identity was super important to me. I was like, I don't want to be the Lotus Notes guy for the rest of my life, even if, that's how Jane connected to me, that's fine, right? But I had that as a chapter of my life, but I did not want to ride that to retirement. I just didn't think it was right for me. I didn't think it was right for my family, for my mental health. I wanted to try new challenges. And so I recalibrated with a goal of being, part of the leadership team at a smaller company. And I achieved that multiple times over. I was, one of those people on the leadership page on their websites, and I had the C-suite title, and I got to attend board meetings. And that was all experience that I had not really had at IBM, because even a VP at IBM is still 4 levels down from the top, right? But, I mean, it's a big company, right? So I was certainly very successful there. And, my IBM experience was amazing and wonderful. And then these subsequent chapters taught me other really wonderful and unique things. But after the third one, like that dinner conversation, the button that my friend pushed was, all right, you climbed that mountain basically the same way, same size mountain about 3 times now. Do you really want to sign up for a fourth and a fifth and a sixth? And at your age, if I can, talk about identity, right? Like I'm, at a point in my career where there is ageism in tech, and, some hot AI startup is not gonna, call you to be their CTO. It's just not gonna happen, right? So I had to be realistic about it and say, okay, well, what should I be doing then? What's the thing that would matter for me, matter for my family, matter for, where I want to go in the world? I'm not ready to retire. I'm not sure I'll ever be ready to retire. My dad didn't until he was 80. And I want to continue to have that drive. And I want to continue to contribute to the industry and to the thing that I've done probably better than anything else, which is help other people develop their careers. And so, this opportunity to parachute into companies, solve a specific problem or set of problems, and then jump back out seemed like it was the right answer. And I feel like my identity is actually stronger in some ways than it was when I was in these small companies that candidly few people had heard of outside of their industries. And, now I'm really standing on my own reputation 100%. But I can post something online and get engagement and talking to people and leads and, references, and it's all good. It actually feels much more like where I was when I was part of a larger company, even though I'm now completely, operating on my own. I'm sure we'll revisit this conceptually, just, even in chatter, 6 or 12 months from now or 3 years from now. And we'll see. And it'll probably be a completely different story. And maybe I will have been successful on TikTok or something. I don't know.
This TikTok thing keeps happening, keeps
It
coming up
does, yeah.
here.
Because it's one of those things. I'm like Jane. I'm super competitive. I think I could probably do it better than so many of the people that I follow, and I just don't know if I could build the audience and if I have the patience to do it, right? But the Airbnb was another one, right? Like it has nothing to do with anything I've done. I don't have any background in it at all. I just know what the experience should be like. It's why we started staying in Airbnbs 10 years ago or 15 years ago or whatever. That industry is really clear. If you do unto others as, you would want done for you, you can be really, really successful. So I get to think about all of this. And I think that that's my identity right now, is around that permission point that we keep coming back to, is I am an advocate for doing the things that are going to make you happy, that then in turn should make you successful, as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah.
I think I just was gonna say the big takeaway from me was that you can have multiple identities, right? It doesn't have to be this one, and constant self-reflection. And I think that's so powerful to just always reevaluate, like where am I drawing joy from right now, where I'm getting motivation and inspiration from. But yeah, it doesn't have to be this title or this job. You can have humans are multidimensional, and you just prove that, and it's really cool. So it's giving me a lot of inspiration as well.
I feel like also it just, Sabrina, maybe you and I will experience this a couple years from now, but we're still obviously slightly newer in our career. Like we've been working for a little bit, but maybe 10, 20, 30 years in, we may start to feel the same thing over and over again, no matter what company you're going to. It's the same problem, same limitations, same, I don't know, stakeholders that you have to deal with. And maybe at some point we're going to be tired of having to navigate that corporate environment. Like I can totally imagine that. And maybe like taking on a freelance role is actually that refreshing change that a lot of people need. I think a lot of times we we kind of stay within a career for a period of time and we love that stability. I'm now like kind of challenging myself because I've been in a couple companies now and I see the recurring problems that I constantly get frustrated with. And sometimes I do think I'm like, if I worked for myself, this would not be a problem I'd be dealing with. I would not be frustrated about this, but it happens in corporate America. And so I don't know, maybe freelance is that refreshing thing that we'll need one day. We're coming to the end of our episode. So, Ed, first of all, thank you so much for sharing so much knowledge and being vulnerable and sharing your experience of this transition with us. And we'll certainly check back in with you in a couple months, maybe as you navigate. You're clearly like kind of coming or past this transition phase, now getting into more of a or BAU phase. But tell us a little bit more about what's next for you in your professional journey. It sounds like you're enjoying the freelance world. Do you see yourself in this world for a period of time? What are you thinking as next steps?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I can find the right balance, that this is what I want to be doing, right? Because I love the opportunity to jump into something brand new, all the time, right? Like there's just so much learning there. Things I've never touched on, industries I've never been in. And yes, there are some things that'll be repetitive motion and applying the same lessons learned. But that's okay, right? If it's done in the context of a new challenge every day. So if somebody dropped a great, permanent C-suite, blah, blah, blah job in my lap tomorrow, would I consider it? Of course, right? I mean, I think you have to always be flexible, but I'm excited about this. I'm just starting up with an organization called Orchid Black that is a bunch of independent people who are mostly pretty senior, but we have some people who are more like, consultants that are on the ground every day. And that organization is at orchid.black. And we're starting some projects, right? And so if that has the structure to be 20 hours a week with this one Orchid Black customer and 10 hours a week with another customer that I'm doing independently or through another collective, part of another one as well, like that could be great for me. And then I could be, back to my side hustles being side hustles, right? And that's okay too. So we'll see. I have a lot of projects out there. None are landed enough to talk about them yet. But there's good stuff happening and we'll see where it goes.
Amazing. Well, thank you again so much. And of course, we always want to hear from our listeners as well. So anybody who may be going through or thinking about a potential transition to freelance, we would love to hear from you. What are some of the things that you think are beneficial as a freelancer versus having a more traditional corporate job? Or what might be some fears you're experiencing as you think about a career in freelance? Email us at whereisthelinepod@gmail.com. And of course, you can always subscribe wherever you listen to us. We are on Apple, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you later.